Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. On behalf of the U-Innovate team, let me welcome all of you to an insightful and exciting webinar. My name is Habib Sherni, ELT Inspector in Le CAF, and I'm joined with Mrs. Samar Amri or Dridi. She likes to be called Mrs. Samar Dridi, as I heard a while ago from her, an ELT teacher in Bizard. We're both excited to introduce our guest speakers, Randall Davis and his daughter, Aubrey Davis, who will shine some light on the teaching of the listening. According to Herman Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, humans typically forget around 70% of what they've learned within 2 days. It is almost the end of the academic year here in Tunisia. So if you would like to ensure maximum benefit from today's session, do not forget to take some notes, which will hopefully have ripple effects on your teaching. Let me remind you that a recorded version of this session will be available very soon via our YouTube channel and a U-Innovate Facebook group. My colleague, Mrs. Samar Dridi, will take your questions to ensure your engagement. So feel free to drop your questions and share your struggles and experiences in the chat box. Now, without any further ado, let me invite Mrs. Samar Dridi to introduce our guests. Over to you, Mrs. Samar.
Thank you, Mr. Habib. Hello, everyone. Hello, Randall and Aubrey. We're glad to have you with us today in our monthly webinar, the U-Innovate webinar. As Mr. Habib mentioned, today we have Randall Davis with us. So Randall has worked in the field of language education for the past 35 years, focusing on instructional technology, professional development, and soft skills training. He has been a keynote speaker at international conferences in many diverse places, such as Saudi Arabia, China, Peru, Japan, Mexico, and the United States. Randall currently teaches at the Institute at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah. He also develops Randall's ESL Cyber
Listening Lab.
Exactly. His motto to life is that our mistakes, humility, and vulnerability are often the birthplace of greater personal growth and deeper human connections. And learning to accept our limitations is the first step in that journey. Wow, that's really very beautiful. So I'm not going with further ado. Now, the floor is yours, Mr. Randall.
But before you do that, let me say a few words about Aubrey. Aubrey Davis is an implementation specialist for a software company based in the United States.
Well, thank you very much. We're really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to take the floor with my daughter, Aubrey, to talk about a really important topic about hearing is easy and learning is hard, and the value of intentional listening. I know as part of the presentation, as you know, Aubrey, I mentioned that we were invited by the organizers. Thank you so much, to speak on my website that I've developed over the years. But our focus is going to be something different. We want to focus specifically on things in more broader terms, the ideas and factors that affect comprehensibility and understanding, not only in school, but in our families, in our communities. And then we're going to talk about keys to improving listening skills in so many different ways. And when I say about intentional listening, I'm talking about suspending judgment, about paying a careful attention to other people, and to listening to their message. And I invited Aubrey because she's really had a role in the development of my website over the many years. Here is one of our episodes on YouTube. It is also on my website. And I think we mentioned, and we want to reiterate, If the only purpose of this type of presentation is just to listen to some ideas, then you could watch that on YouTube 3 weeks from now. We want to encourage you in the chat to be able to engage and participate. So Aubrey, if you could briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into the presentation.
Hi. So like you said, I'm Aubrey. I've worked on the website, since I was little, doing, voicing the listening activities. Now I'm working on, fixing transcripts, updating the technology, just making it more accessible. And that's my involvement in the website. As far as my educational work background, like they said, I do work as a software implementation specialist, which basically just means I help people set up software. And I've had experience like training people on how to use the software. And, different skill levels there. Some people know exactly what they're doing. Some people, no idea, can barely turn on a computer, right? So, that I do have a little bit of experience, teaching people of different skill levels, even though it is in a completely different, field.
All right. Thank you, Aubrey. And I appreciate that. And your ideas are going to come throughout the presentation. I find that what we're going to do is have an ongoing dialogue between me and Aubrey and you, the attendees. And we ask you to carefully watch the chat because we want you to feel a part of what is going on. So with that in mind, what I want to say is that over the last several years, I've done a number of broadcasts with teachers in Tunisia, Riyadh, Cuba. We did a couple of presentations together. Also, we presented at TESOL International. We created a recording on different types of games that could be done in the classroom. I've done Mona Boulel. We did a broadcast with her as well. I mean, we've done a number of things. Ines Benreba, I did a broadcast with her and her students. We talked about Ramadan and the importance of that observance. And so one of the things that I want to say is that there is a danger in inviting someone like us to come to give a presentation in a webinar like this. And you might say, Randall, what do you mean by danger? Well, there's always a challenge in inviting a speaker who is unfamiliar with your context. And this individual parachutes nicely down into the trenches, gives you a rallying pep talk on how you can, motivate your students. And then this person is then airlifted out an hour later. And then those that are watching this presentation say, he has no idea about our context and our situation. And so one of the things I want to think about is some speakers have very superficial understanding of what you need, your challenges, and some of the things that we might share today, we understand. You might say, that's not relevant to our situation. So Aubrey and I have tried to think about ideas that would be relevant to all of you. Keeping that in mind, if you were to ask me, where is Tunisia? Well, Tunisia is one of the 54 countries in the continent of Africa. Of course, you have the Tunisian flag and the crescent moon, and the points of that star represents something very important to the Tunisian people, the 5 pillars of Islam. And in couscous, I can talk about those things, but that doesn't make me any more qualified to speak to you today. And so as we go into our ideas, one of the things that we did before the broadcast, and Aubrey, you and I reviewed some of these, we asked different teachers, what are some of the challenges that you face on a daily basis, to give us context? So there was one teacher that said, and these were posted in the Facebook group. One teacher said, there is a challenge of using and finding authentic materials and being able to adapt them to different students. And how do you use authentic materials? Another teacher said, we have mixed ability classes, students with learning disabilities, and sometimes our students fail in listening tests. Another teacher said, I work with mixed level students. Randall, please understand, I have 30, 35 students, and they're all of different abilities and ranges. And the teacher said, I think these concerns are the same worldwide. And I think to a certain degree they are. Another teacher said, how do we cut and edit videos? Now, Aubrey, just that one topic alone, we could spend several hours. So as we talk today, please understand any one of the points that we shared today, we could spend a whole new webinar on. But I did give a link here in case you want to know how to use timestamps in YouTube to cut and edit. Some of the other things, one teacher said, I teach in rural area, maybe 25 to 35 students, and finding suitable content is the most challenging for me, and the problem with internet connections. And feel free, if you're watching the broadcast today, feel free to post some of the challenges that you faced, if they are similar to these or if they are unique. Another thing is, well, what do I mean by suitable materials? Well, it could be suitable based on topic or vocabulary or accent. And Aubrey, you and I both have different accents, even from the same family. All right.
Yes.
Someone also mentioned about, once again, connectivity, maybe high resource, low resource environments. And just so you know, Aubrey, I've had Tunisian teachers that I interviewed a Tunisian teacher, and they say, this is my situation. And then another Tunisian teacher says, they don't understand my situation. My context is quite different. There was another one that says noise coming from the outside of the classroom. How do I mitigate and deal with, cars passing by or construction noise? That can be unique and a real challenge as well. So with a summary of all the ideas that we looked at, we teach, Randall, we teach, and Aubrey, we teach in diverse and large classes, multi-level classes, having different ranges of internet access and technology, helping students with learning disabilities, and finding suitable content. Now, for Aubrey, for all of these people, it was interesting. I found this quote on the internet about diversification and differentiation. Now, for you, the teachers that are watching, keep in mind, do you agree with this? Imagine you're overloaded in a classroom and someone says to you, teaching mixed ability classes might feel like a minefield initially, but armed with these 5 top tips, you'll be breezing through it in no time. Teaching these types of classes will do wonders for your teaching skills. Now, and it says, plus, think how satisfied that you've kept everyone engaged. Now, Aubrey, does that sound like, I think that's going to be challenging?
Yeah, that is not useful advice at all.
Well, especially in the realities. And I would be interesting to hear, do teachers feel that teaching multi-skill levels classes is a breeze rather than pulling their hair out? So Aubrey, what I decided to do, of course, ChatGPT is, coming along. It came out in November, and I decided to ask ChatGPT this question. What are 10 teaching ideas that you can come up with for the English teachers in Tunisia with mixed level classes of 30 or more students? Focus your suggestions on teaching with authentic materials, with an unreliable connection, and make sure these ideas make these teachers the stars of their schools so they can have more time to spend with their families and next year get a 15% raise. Now, Aubrey, what do you think? And again, this is an imaginary situation, but what do you think ChatGPT would say?
I don't know. I've used that software a few times. Sometimes it'll be like, I am not qualified to answer that question.
So here is, now this is an imaginary response.
Not what it actually said, yeah.
LOL, are you kidding? Good luck. You're on your own. So imagine that's one of the challenges of that. And now we have less than 45 minutes, Aubrey, to answer all of these questions for the Tunisian teachers. Now I see in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say we have a note in the chat that challenges in one place are opportunities in another place. And that's definitely true.
Yeah, it can be. And Mongia says pupils find spoken American English clear and less challenging. But what if we want to have different accents? That would be key.
I think it depends on what region the person comes from too.
Absolutely. And so let's go ahead and get into it. I want to make a couple of points, and then we're going to get into some of the challenges and maybe possible solutions. So first of all, I think, Aubrey, you and I were talking about that hearing and listening are two different things. And sometimes
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
hearing, when you think of hearing, hearing is actually perceiving sound, and listening is quite a different skill. Listening and speaking are reciprocal skills, so that you need both of those. And I like the last one. If you think you're a good listener, perhaps it's time to assess that reality, because we're going to be talking later, Aubrey, about soft skills, the idea of listening to one another. And this is what I mentioned, the difference between listening and perceiving sound. So one of the things, Aubrey, we would like to, for those that are watching right now, be thinking about this question. If you haven't chimed in already, what factors affect your students' abilities to hear and understand English? An example is limited exposure. And are any of these factors unique to schools in Tunisia, or are these universal challenges? So, Aubrey, are we ready to get into some of these factors?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, here we go. Let's go ahead and begin. So first of all, I want to talk about this idea, rate of speed, learning as a limited processor. And one of the things, Aubrey, sometimes my students say that, Randall, native speakers speak too quickly. And I say, well, maybe you listen too slowly. Now, I don't mean to say that in any I don't mean to say that in any diminishing way, but some of the challenges that, whether you're playing games or whether you're doing different tasks, sometimes the ability to process language is really challenging. And I see another comment in here. Another challenge is that our learners and with their mixed abilities find their freedom to speak their second language only in the classroom, with no dare to use the language frequently, maybe for fear of being mocked or making mistakes. Aubrey, what do you think about the fear? You grew up in Japan. You went 6 years to Japanese school, and you've studied here. Any thought on that, about the fear of looking stupid?
I mean, that's
Unfortunately.
definitely a thing. Like, I can understand Japanese still a little bit, but I am scared to speak it because my accent is really good, but my vocabulary is not. Because I don't remember a lot of it, and I only learned it to, the level of a child. Um, so it's definitely like, even in English, sometimes it's like, I don't know if I want to speak on that topic because the internet's gonna, be all on top of that if I'm wrong.
Right, right. People are going to comment and so forth. One person says, Mongia says, listening is an art, and I totally agree with that. Another person says, teach pre-vocabulary, introduce key vocabulary. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And another person says, what advice would you give to a student who panics when he or she cannot follow listening? So we're going to give you some
We actually
ideas,
have good
Aubrey.
examples for that, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that. So let's give an example of this idea of rate of speed and acoustic blur. So everyone listen carefully. And if I say, hey, did you eat yet? No, Jew? Did you eat yet? No, Jew? In other words, did you eat yet? No, did you? Again, what we see when we call this acoustic blur, we're talking about word reductions. And we're going to be talking about techniques to handle this. But Aubrey, you gave another example as we were preparing. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, one of the ones that we see most commonly in English is the word and. It's very rarely pronounced and unless you're saying it for emphasis. So, if I'm talking about my pets, like, oh, I have cats and dogs, and I leave out the D. Or I might say fish and chips,
Like,
just the
like
Yeah,
bananas and pears or something like that.
exactly. Chocolate
All
and
right.
peanut butter. Yeah, exactly. Asked and asked. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, there are certainly different combinations that we could do. All right. So the next one, including in addition to rate of speed and acoustic blur, again, the student trying to process all of this information, and we're going to come back to that idea, panic when he does not understand. We also see another comment: hearing is perceiving, however, listening is paying attention to sounds and their thoughtful attention. And Aubrey, later in our presentation, we're not going to just talk about sounds, but we're going to talk about listening to the human heart.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that. So let's talk about idiomatic expression, Aubrey. So often, for example, when I was learning Spanish and Japanese, sometimes I learned expressions that were in a textbook that I realize are not really used any day. Now, this idea of ghost, I mean, we're not talking about Casper the friendly ghost, but just real briefly, what does ghost mean for those that may or may not be aware?
So that's to just stop talking to someone. So it's most commonly used like with dating, where it's like, oh, this is going bad, and then you just stop talking to them. So you ghost
Like, why did
them.
you ghost me?
Exactly.
Yeah. But the challenge with that, Aubrey, is sometimes we come up with expressions that teachers find either on the in a dictionary online, and they're
Exactly.
asking
Ignore.
themselves
Mhm.
whether they actually use them. So let me show you some. And again, one of the questions we would have, what do you or your students, how do you and your students go about introducing and learning slang or idiomatic expressions, and how do you go about teaching them effectively? So let's take a look at some examples here, Aubrey. Now I'm going to show you these words right here. I mean, imagine, oh, everything is hunky dory. Do you actually use that now?
No.
Okay. Oh, you look really spiffy.
I might say that ironically, like I don't mean it. I'm being sarcastic.
Okay. Oh, that's baloney. Like,
Yeah,
like
nobody
that's
uses that.
nonsense. Do you?
No.
No, and you like fuddy. Oh, you're all fuddy duddy. Time to skedaddle. But one of the challenges is that as a teacher, you're trying to figure out what is being used in current language, whether it's in business, whether it's the classroom, whether it's with online, and that's one of the challenges I think that teachers face. So you are going to give me some to see if I
Yeah.
was aware of it. And then later in the presentation, we're going to talk about suggestions of how idiomatic expressions can be introduced in the class to improve listening. So go ahead, Aubrey. You're going to put those
Okay,
in
so
the
this one
chat.
is one I use a lot. A minute. It's been a
Okay.
minute. Do you know
Now,
what that
just so you
means?
know, everyone, Aubrey did not share with me before the presentation to assess my ability to understand current slang among younger
I'm
generations.
a millennial, yeah.
Okay,
There
so
are
here
new
we
ones
go.
I have no idea about.
Oh, and here, Habib put another challenge. It has to do with cultural load.
Mhm.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. Great point there. Also, another question comes in a comment. We teach them in context, often in pre-listening. Great. So,
Exactly.
Aubrey, I have no idea. I'm thinking,
It's been
oh,
a
wait
minute.
a minute. Yeah, wait a minute.
Nope.
I'm going to talk with you in a minute. Is that what it means?
It's been a minute means it's been a while. It's been a long time.
Wait. And where did that come from?
I don't know,
When I
but it's been a minute.
Okay, means it's been a while.
It's been a
Okay.
while, yeah.
Okay, give me
Another
another
one I
one.
use, and
And
then I
again,
have a
we're going to be
couple like,
talking about okay. We're going to talk about introducing ways to understand it. Spill the tea. Now I understand spill the beans, right?
this is
Don't spill the
similar to
beans like
that.
you tell it. What?
This is similar. Spill the tea
Okay.
is tell me the gossip.
Now I've heard that just a little bit. I don't use that. I usually use spill the beans. So these are examples. Did you have one more?
There's another one that I want to bring up
Okay.
is gnarly. Now that
Gnarly.
word,
Okay.
you might have heard of it like in the 80s and 90s, the word gnarly meant something that was cool or hip or
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Rough or
But
something like that, right?
now it means something gross.
Okay. Well, that's a little bit unique way in which
So
I probably wouldn't.
yeah.
Right. And another comment comes, students can learn idiomatic expressions through context.
Mhm.
Are you going to sit for the exam, break a leg? And those are older expressions. Sometimes we use those, but we're talking about newer expressions that are not in your textbooks yet. And we're going to come back to some of those. So let's
Yeah,
go
and real quick, I
on.
want to mention too, is
Uh-huh.
it's hard sometimes because you've got expressions that are common, like in spoken English, but other things that maybe you only run into, like if you're typing it.
Right. And there's a couple of comments that come. I think idioms are really interesting, especially the funny ones to motivate young
Yeah.
learners. Also, some
Like what I
comments
said
about
yesterday,
technology.
upsetty spaghetti.
Oh, yeah. There's so many of them. Another comment, most often the students are ahead of the context in the textbook. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Again, talking about authentic learning as well. The next thing is what was just brought up a minute ago is sometimes students lack background knowledge or context. That's that cultural load. And sometimes we have the tendency to see the world through the prism of our own understanding. As an example of that, I say, hey, this morning I took a shower. And the question is, does your shower look like this? Does your shower look like this? Or none of those?
And another thing we talked about too when we were preparing is that the context of did I take a shower could be completely different, depending on who you're talking to, right? Someone might enjoy taking a shower. It's like, this morning I took a shower. It was great. It was relaxing. But like, I know something that's really common with like autistic people is that they hate taking showers. And this is something I experienced too. But like, I feel like the water's attacking me. If I say I took a shower, that wasn't a fun thing.
Right. I see some other comments talking about introducing them, talking about in movies and songs. They should be authentic. Example, it rains cats and dogs. Yeah, all of those are very common. And we're talking about also ones that are just being introduced now into our society. The other thing is, what about people might not understand, going back to cultural load, the same word, but different interpretation. In other words, couscous. Okay. Again, some people might find that is good food. But what about in Utah, Aubrey? Get ready, Tunisian teachers. Funeral potatoes. Funeral potatoes are a very popular
They're really
dish.
good.
They're really good. And there's not enough time to talk about the context of that. Same word, good food, but yet unique outcome and response. Someone else says the use of idioms might increase learners' motivation. I agree with that. They're cheesy baked potatoes. That is, Aubrey, you put that in. Great.
Yeah.
Great. The next idea about comprehensibility. So we've talked about acoustic blur, about word reductions. We've talked also about speed. We've talked about lack of cultural understanding, idiomatic expressions. But one of the other challenges, what I call limited exposure to decontextualized and disjointed speech. Now, what do I mean by that? Here's a picture of Aubrey and her brother Joshua. They went to Japanese schools, and when they came home and they brought over their friends, they were speaking all over the place. They were not using a natural flow of the textbook. Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. Or, what is your name? My name is Mona. What is your name? My name is Randall. Now, at a beginning level, you often find that natural flow of things, but the reality is language is very nonlinear. So in other words, even though students practice a certain a formulaic expression in the classroom, it might not always go that way. It's kind of like years ago, I shared this with you, Aubrey, about listening. I was living in South America. I was learning Spanish, and I walked into an ice cream parlor and I said in Spanish, "Excuse me." The person said, "Hi, how can I help you?" And I said, Aubrey, maybe you.
I would like some ice cream, please.
I would like some ice cream. And they said, "What flavor do you want?" And you say,
Caramel.
"Yeah, whatever." But during the middle of the conversation, although it was going the way that I was planning, then all of a sudden, when I was going to pay, I offered them a large bill, and the person said, "I'm sorry, we can't take that amount of money." And so at that point, I never studied anything in my textbook that was going to address this unique situation. And a man stood up in the ice cream parlor, someone I did not know, and said, "Hi, I can help you. give me your money and I will take it across the street. And the guy in the pharmacy will give me change and I'll come back. And what did I do? I gave him my money. I was expecting things to go well, but then all of a sudden the conversation went in different directions. And the owner of the ice cream shop, just shook his head. That man's not going to come back. He took your money.
Well, sometimes like the conversations just completely, oh yes, the money was stolen. Yep. But yeah, sometimes conversations completely derail. Like you've got your beginning, middle. Now we're talking about something else.
Right.
We don't even remember what we're talking about, and you don't see a lot of that in textbooks.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's being brought up, formal use of language versus language for communication.
Mhm.
Sometimes formal language might have a very structured formula. When you get into the community, it doesn't. And here is cross-cultural idioms. They got something with Tunisian dialect, was an outstanding task with my learners. Oh, that would be interesting to learn more about as well. Yeah, they stole my money. Actually, I gifted it to the gentleman, and my friends who were waiting outside just shook their heads and they couldn't believe it. Okay. So the next factor that affects understanding is materials not adapted to the learning needs and levels of students. This is what we're going to talk about now, where different learning styles and abilities, mixed ability classes, and sometimes materials are pre-digested or oversimplified that really lack authenticity. They just don't even seem natural at all.
And then
Which I
there's a
think is
comment in the chat that practicing language is more efficient than learning it in a formal way, and that's definitely true. Where there's a joke here sometimes where people will be like, "Oh, I went to school, I learned Spanish, and the only phrase I learned was "Donde está la biblioteca," which is "Where is the library?" When is that going to help me if I go to Spain?
Oh yeah.
That's the only thing I remember too.
Yeah. Some of those real challenges can be hard.
Yeah.
All right. The next idea. Now, each one of these, Aubrey, we're talking about the issues, and then we're going to talk about the solutions here. The next thing is probably the most important, but we don't have enough time to address it all, is not listening carefully to the thoughts and feelings of others. It should say others, because number one, you assume you understand, and because of your own biases. And what I mean by that is sometimes, do we really listen to understand, or do we just listen to respond about whatever issues there might be, economic, social, political, religious, and so forth? And sometimes when I say the invisible gorilla, I'm going to bring that idea back a little bit later, is that sometimes our own mindsets influence our ability to listen or not listen. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So, Aubrey, let's now we've talked about a number of issues. Let's talk about some solutions. And one of the questions I would have is, what are some of the challenges using, it should say using technology in the classroom, whether you're in the face-to-face classroom or you're in online classrooms, what would those be? So one of the things when I mentioned about technology is and each one of these things we're going to talk about, Aubrey, could be, we could take an hour to talk about each one of these, but there has to be a careful balance between the rationale of why I use it, the availability and cost, and the technology itself. And sometimes what happens is that I suggest that generally speaking, only use technology when it supports your goals and not just because it looks or sounds good. And here's an example of a blender. It has, 25 buttons, and some people might use all of the buttons, but some people I just need technology with an on and off switch, keeping it simple. And Aubrey, I think you had a thought on this as well.
Yeah. So with that, like you were saying, some people find it useful, some people don't. Some people have to be drugged kicking and screaming into new technology. Like I keep telling you, you need to get multiple monitors because it'll make your life easier, and you just don't think you need it. And I could be wrong, but having all of that available to you, so that you can pick and choose is good. Like I like the 12-speed blender because if I want to make a smoothie, or I just want to make fresh ice, or maybe I'm just grinding something up, and I'm going to use that as an ingredient, that's useful for me. But like for you, you only want the one button. So having these choices available when possible is, good for the different levels of learners.
It's kind of like with Teams, there are going to be some people that need 3 buttons, and then there are power users as well. Here's another comment that came in. That's why we should balance English for academic use and English for everyday communication. I think that's important. Someone else said, I provide my pupils with empty panels of a story, and then each one comes up with a different story because they have different backgrounds and values. That is that using
Do we mean
of different
picture story?
modalities. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. And I think that's a
That could
picture
be
story. And
interesting.
yeah, using different modalities, I think is really important. Another person says we count the number of words in a reading comprehension text, and we make sure a listening passage does not exceed that. Again, that is adjusting that to the different levels of students. So let's get into this, Aubrey, and thank you for chiming in. And again, if I don't read things correctly, please let me know. This is not a spelling test or anything. We want people to be fully engaged. So the first one, going back to what we said originally, is about rate of speed. We're going to talk about screen readers, variable speed control, captions that create scaffolding activities, and to accomplish also addressing issues with word reductions. Now, to do that, what I did is I decided, with the help of one of the Tunisian teachers, is to look at some of the textbooks. This is from a third-year secondary education students book, and I really like this activity because they're starting out with some type of pre-listening activity. And from what I saw, there is some of the ability to download those audio files. And if you click on that audio file, sometimes it gives you the ability to vary speed, but not incrementally. Now, Aubrey, in a minute, we're going to talk about this. But what if you have a classroom audio file and you don't want to reduce it down to 75%, but maybe 90%? In other words, you just want to adjust it just a little bit. Now, first of all, I'm going to put back into the chat right here. That is the PowerPoint from today of all the resources we're going to be using. And so first is called the online tone generator. And what's really nice about this is that it has the ability of you uploading a class file, an audio file, and then you can see you have very granular control right over there to slow down the audio to adjust it as needed. But Aubrey, you were talking, there might be students, again, in multi-level classes where students might want to speed it up individually. Could you talk about that briefly?
Yeah, that's something that I do in my everyday life, not just in learning. So like I did this a lot in school because I do have some attention problems. So if something is going pretty slowly, it's not making it into my head. It's that difference between hearing and listening where I can hear the words, but I don't understand them because they're too slow. So having that option where you can speed it up so that, if you do tend to process things faster, you have that option. Slow it down, if maybe it's a little overwhelming, that's good. Like I listen to a lot of audiobooks and I always listen to them extra fast because otherwise they're boring for me. So, maybe more like people who are more maybe at a higher level of learning or just don't have an attention span like I don't, it's good to have that option to speed it up in addition to slowing it down.
It's kind of like speed listening training, like speed reading, but speed listening. And this could be a useful tool if students say, okay, for students that are struggling a little bit more with the language, we can reduce the speed a little bit. The individual student could speed up that audio file incrementally. Also, we see another comment came in. We can ask students what they like to listen to, stories, songs, and so forth. They may even choose the themes. Really good idea. Another thing that would come in is what if, and again, each one of these tools, Aubrey, we could talk for hours on, but this is a really cool Chrome extension to control the playback of video files. Now, in YouTube, you have the ability to adjust the speed control a little bit, like 50%, 75, 100, and some other minor adjustments. But with this actual extension with Chrome, and again, it's called the video speed controller, it has the ability to install. And as you can see on the screen right here, can you see that,
The
Aubrey?
red box. Yeah, in the left.
Yeah, they're right back. And I just blew it up just a little bit here. You can incrementally adjust the video. So if you're watching a YouTube video with this extension in Chrome, you have the ability to slow it down and to speed it up as well. So I would be interested in any of you. What other tools do you use in this regard? I mentioned that. Let's talk about, Aubrey, I found in one of the textbooks, this was Activate and Perform, the third-year secondary book. It has a story about the Christmas present, a great story. And let's talk about the service Natural Reader and how that could be a benefit to students or teachers who have a PDF, who have a web page, and want to adjust it. Let's talk about that. Again,
Yeah,
as
so
we're
going
thinking
back
about
to the previous slide,
yeah,
if you just want to pull it up for just a minute.
this one right here.
No, the one right after it with all the text.
Oh, this one right here.
That one. Yes, exactly. So looking at this, you're going to have a lot of students who are just fine with that. But then you might have people with learning disorders, maybe dyslexia, maybe people with ADHD or anxiety. Like I look at that text and that is so much text. My brain is blanking. I can't sit down and read that. So what I use, and this is the tool that we're going to talk about, is Natural Reader. So exactly, it's a text-to-speech app. So you can take that. I use that a lot. I even use it at work if I'm reading technical documents that don't have a lot of diagrams, because it doesn't work with diagrams. But if I'm reading a bunch of text, I will turn on my Natural Reader extension. And there are other software options that do the same thing. This is just the one that I use. And it will, yeah, like in this slide right here, I can follow along to what it's reading to me at the same time. So if it's something that I just vaguely need to be aware of, I'll convert it into an audio file and do something else at the same time. If it's something I really need to learn, I will do what it's showing in the monitor right there. I'll have it playing and it's highlighting where we are in the text so that I have both the visual and the auditory stimulus to help me learn what's happening.
Yeah, and one of the things that, again, each of these tools is quite unique is where, again, a teacher has the ability with a student, individual learner doing independent learning to open up a web page. And then with this is the Natural Reader with the Chrome extension. You can actually select accents, British accent, man, woman, Australian, Indian, or whatever.
And then there is a comment that it's not that authentic. And there was, the earlier versions of the software were kind of bad. They are using, the premium voices are good, and they now have AI generated voices that are really good. So, the technology is evolving.
Yeah, they're ultra realistic now, but I appreciate people
and then
mentioning
speech notes apps. Yeah, that's a good one too.
Right. I can see some other people talking about some different ideas, talking about Tunisian learners are not exposed to native speakers. That's really a hindrance when you expose them. And the nice thing, this is my website. So if you don't want to listen to my voice and you have the Natural Reader extension, you could listen to the same transcript in a whole other different voices. And the technology, AI, is becoming so popular.
Well, I think you were going to cover this a little bit later, but we are working on the website of creating like more content, but using AI generated voices to give a broader, set of accents so that you're not just listening to our accent all the time.
Right. Well, let's go on. A couple of ideas. Someone asked a little bit about how do you build idiomatic expressions, grammar structures? How do students become aware of those? Again, there's a lot of comments that are coming in. Speech Notes app is beneficial for both students and teachers. That's great. Let's talk about this idea, pros and cons on how to learn some of these idiomatic expressions. We're running out of time, Aubrey. We want to make sure we leave a couple of minutes for comments, but let's just briefly talk about this, about introducing idioms and some pros and cons.
There are the options, like we say right there, ask a teenager. You get the most common, the up-to-date lingo, but it might go away real fast. YouTube videos. are a good place to be exposed to that. Ask a teacher. Let's see. There are websites like the idioms.com.
Right. And one of the projects we're working at the University of Utah is called Professor Idioms, where we have a puppet. We're using puppetry to introduce those. Certainly, we could spend a lot of times. Again, it looks like someone mentioned a plethora of tools. Yeah, there's so many tools. And sometimes, as mentioned, sometimes when you talk about tech tools, and as I mentioned right from the beginning of that blender, sometimes you want to say, number one, decide on your needs and then select the tool. Don't select a tool and then figure out how to add it into what you're doing, I think is really key. Let's go on. The last couple of things, talking about adaptability to learning needs. And one of the things that I've started to do, one of the comments that started at the beginning of the before the conference, is what are some of the things that I'm doing on my websites to address different learning difficulties. And this is the newest section of my website. It's called Stories. And we use different AI technologies where they're pre-listening activities that tap into different modalities. I have discussion questions at easy, intermediate, and difficult levels. And probably the most important part of this section of my website is, again, tapping into different modalities of, again, recognizing that students have different learning styles, visual and auditory and kinesthetic and tactile. We could talk more about that, but I would take a look at that section of my website as well. And again, I just put the link to that PowerPoint as well. Again, a lot of good comments. Let's go on to the last part, Aubrey, which I think is probably, in my opinion, the most important, dealing with soft skills. And when people are thinking about listening, they're thinking simply about all of the other ideas that have been shared, but not listening carefully to the thoughts and feelings of others. Sometimes we don't do this because you assume you understand and because of your own biases. And what I mean by that is like a parent saying to a teenager, you don't understand, or teachers to students. This particular student is not very motivated because, and we project into their minds what might be going on in their lives. And senior colleagues, I've been teaching for 35 years and you'll understand what you've taught as long as I have. Those really diminish people's feelings. And what often happens, I'm going to show you a picture and tie this together and tell me what you see. And then again, I can't ask you to, it'd take you too long to chat what you see, but take a look at that picture. And if I ask you, how many tigers do you see? Most people say, what? One. But if you look carefully in the stripes, it says hidden tiger. In other words, sometimes we see our students, we see other colleagues through the prism of our own experience, and this shapes the way that we interact with them. Now, as we were looking at some of the content from your books, empathy while listening, I think is important. I noticed a lot of good topics. Love and peace and solidarity and addressing greed and hatred and racism. Also, I noticed, again, from one of the other textbooks, charity and altruism. And I also noticed a story in one of the books dealing with death. It was a local couple killed in a plane crash. And right now, I want to preface my comments by giving a little trigger warning because I want to talk briefly about something that happened in our family regarding death. But in looking at this particular topic, sometimes, and I think the story addresses this tastefully about people struggling with issues. But what if the issue of death comes up in your classroom? In this case, a plane crash. In our place, my son and Aubrey's brother died by suicide 11 years ago. And you never know when this topic could come up about some struggle, some tragedy. And what we sometimes do is there is a difference between empathy versus sympathy. And sometimes what we do, Aubrey, and I don't know if you ever experienced this, oh, I'm sorry you lost your brother. I lost my grandmother. Any thought about Aubrey, about listening and about empathy?
Oh, it's interesting that you bring that up because I did have someone say, oh, I'm sorry that happened my grandmother is sick right now. And I'm like, I'm sorry that's happening to you. That's not quite the same thing. I'm sorry your grandma's sick. My brother is dead. So, it's just kind of like not helpful at all,
Right. And yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's not if, but when, as teachers, and this is what I bring back to the idea of intentional listening, is listening with the heart. Because your students, and I'm sure you have experienced death, illness, seen the effects of divorce, financial stress. And one of the real challenges for all of us is that our hearts and our eyes can only see what the mind is prepared to comprehend. Are we ready to deeply listen? And so, what we've done on our website, Aubrey, you mentioned about trigger warnings. Could you very
Mhm.
briefly mention about that as people are selecting materials online?
Yeah, we're starting to add content warnings just so that, like, if we're talking about suicide or maybe a car accident, just so you're aware, like students are aware, okay, this is the content that we're going to be discussing. You can make the choice as to whether or not you're in a place where you can listen to that. Like there are a couple of activities that have the sound of a car crash and it's played as funny. And I think a lot of people would find it funny, but as someone who was in a very serious car accident, it's not funny to me, you know? So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this is something just to be aware of
Right.
so that you know what you're getting into.
Absolutely. And people are mentioning about empathetic, sensitive. There are sensitive issues. And the challenge
Mhm.
is that sometimes as teachers, we completely avoid them. But if we lay the
Yeah, we don't want to
groundwork,
do that.
sufficient
Yeah.
groundwork, sometimes we can do that. So let us conclude with a couple of, someone says, I've used the one on my website about smoking addiction, smoking habit. Right there, kicking the habit. I think that's useful. But I would say that sometimes a trigger warning can be useful. So let me end with two ideas. As we began the presentation, we were talking about listening in general, accents, idiomatic expressions. We were talking about all these. But one of my favorite quotes about listening comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. And he said, deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of another person. And you can call it compassionate listening, but because it allows people to empty their heart and suffer less. So if I were to address all of these issues that we talked about today, all of them are important, but the soft skills of deep listening are probably the most will radically change your interaction with your students and help you develop greater empathy. So when I think about Tunisian teachers, one of the Tunisian teachers right before the conference said, our biggest motivational tools as Tunisian teachers are the love of our country, our hopeful spirit, the belief of our abilities, and a dream for a better future. And I think this is really possible because you as teachers, and I've seen this in interacting with teachers from Tunisia, you are you could say that teachers in your country are so skilled in trying to connect, trying to motivate, and many of you are very chameleonic. In other words, when you are faced with a challenge, you have the ability to engage, to interact, to change, to transform the lives of your students. And Aubrey and I wish you well in doing so. Thank you very much.